We're in such flux globally, moving from globalization to regionalization of markets and a lot of the uncertainty that's involved globally now in supply chains. So it is an incredibly important time, I think, for us to cast our eyes beyond the U.S. shores. Because what happens internationally invariably affects the way we do business here.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Feed Science Podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm Bob Odker and I'm here to have a little visit with the guest, and maybe we can all learn a little bit and go away a little better informed. And so today my guest is Constance Cullman. And Constance, I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself to our viewers and give us a little bio.
All right, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today, Bob. I'm Constance Cullman. I'm the president and CEO of the American Feed Industry Association. AFIA is the trade association that represents every aspect of animal food production in the United States. And we represent about a little over 70% of all the feed that's manufactured in the country are manufactured by members of AFIA. So it's been a pleasure to work with AFIA for the last several years. I'm a self-described Ohio farm girl. Grew up on a livestock operation, so it's near and dear to my heart. Spent my career in agriculture and just recently have the honor of serving as the board chair for the International Feed Industry Federation, where we're able to take some of the challenges that are happening globally and bring that to bear on what's the business environment for U.S. manufacturers of animal food.
Oh, that sounds very interesting and quite an exciting time to be getting involved in the international side of things, I would imagine.
Absolutely. We're in such flux globally, moving from globalization to regionalization of markets and a lot of the uncertainty that's involved globally now in supply chains. So it is an incredibly important time, I think, for us to cast our eyes beyond the U.S. shores. Because what happens internationally invariably affects the way we do business here. And we're certainly seeing a lot of that happening now with just some of the changes in supply relationships and purchasing relationships. So it's one of the reasons that the American Feed Industry Association is paying so much attention.
You already know that the key to a profitable operation is healthy, productive animals. This starts with the quality and safety of your production inputs. Our team of experts at Kemin are driven by curiosity to develop science-backed ingredients and solutions to help you maintain feed and water quality, improve intestinal health, optimize nutrition, and eliminate pathogens. Learn more today by diving in at kemin.com/ag.
I'm really glad to hear that we're going to have some people involved in these discussions that actually have some connection, to agriculture, who've grown up on a farm. Oftentimes I wonder if some of these people know which end of the animal the feed goes in front of. So I'm really glad to see that you're going to pitch in here and help them out. So with that in mind, hey, this U.S. trade policy is certainly about as strange as I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I was wondering if you had, some ideas on all these changes and how they affect the market.
Oh, well, I definitely do. I've been involved on international trade issues from early in my career. Even when I was working at the university, international trade and foreign policy was my area of focus. And I have never seen this much uncertainty in the global markets as we're seeing today. And it poses a lot of challenges for our members, Bob, because it's difficult to do business when we don't know what the business climate is going to be from one year to the next, or even 1 month to the next month. It's difficult to know when and where to make investments in export-oriented capacity or foreign competitors suddenly being able to gain an advantage in export markets or even in our domestic market. So it's been a lot of very challenging for our members to just know what kind of business decisions are in the best interest long term because they don't know what the long term might be. We're also dealing daily with threats of retaliation, which are very destabilizing. The animal food sector depends on exports. And global value chains. For example, we have co-products, byproducts, the international markets. So uncertainty about market access or retaliatory trade actions can really reduce demand for some of our companies. One thing that's different about us versus some of the other agricultural sectors or some of the other economic sectors in the U.S. economy is we do not have a trade deficit in animal food. So tariffs on imports makes it hard for us to keep feed costs low, as we are still a major importer of some of the ingredients. But that trade flows both ways, and so it's a relationship that's really important as we go forward. There's been a lot of talk about China, as you've known. And of course, there was just recently an announcement that a deal has been cut with China that I think a lot of folks are looking at with great interest. But the one thing is I wanted to point out is that it's the third largest export market and third largest importer into the United States. So it really illustrates that relationship the animal food industry has with this country. In our particular case, that includes a strong dependency on China for critical inputs such as vitamins and amino acids. Matter of fact, China produces virtually all vitamins produced globally. There's some limited production in Europe, but they are the primary producer. So, how do you end up pushing back sometimes on some of our trading relationships when we're so completely dependent upon a single source for some of our most critical ingredients?
And I mean, that's really the essence of what we've been going through for some time, isn't it?
It is. And it's not just China. I mean, we see regulatory hurdles from trading partners in Australia, Japan, Brazil, the EU. And it's not just inefficiencies. It oftentimes represent deliberate trade barriers that really put a cap on our ability to innovate, restricts customer choice, obviously, places U.S. companies at a disadvantage. So addressing these obstacles, it's really pretty critical to ensure that we've got market access and level the playing field for our U.S. products, including pet food. I don't ever want to forget about pet food because it's such an incredibly important part of our portfolio as well. So we're also trying to make sure, though, that as we try to navigate these obstacles and these barriers, which we're appreciative is being tackled, we're also concerned about the uncertainty may lead some of our buyers to shift to suppliers they perceive to be more reliable. So again, it's the story of the day is uncertainty, and that's been our biggest challenge. So right now, our members are working to be more flexible in their supply chain planning. They're monitoring policy risk very closely. Some of them are paying premiums for security of supply. And I'm pleased to say they're working through AFIA to engage in trade and regulatory advocacy, and all that work that's necessary to shape outcomes and promote competitiveness internationally.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, very multi-layered. I mean, sometimes I think just the discussions and the actual negotiations impact those of us that are in agriculture tremendously, just by the increase in commodities based on what we think is going to happen. And we've got all that worked through while we're waiting to see what actually does happen.
Yeah.
It can be very confusing.
Absolutely. And one of the things we're also watching too is as we make these trade deals, are they enforceable? And that's one of the things, through normal trade negotiations, there's an agreement, there's enforcement mechanisms, but we're excited about some of the progress that this administration has made with making deals. We just want to make sure that they're not just handshake deals that can be walked away from easily, right? That there's some sort of enforceability to them. Because as we look to develop new markets and we are focused on that, how do we make sure that our efforts to establish that in that new market have some sense of security in their agreements and their relationship with the United States?
Sure, absolutely. Well, and, speaking of relationships, we've got some very long established relationships that have worked, quite well. And then you mentioned, new markets that might be working on. I guess, Well, I guess can you just name a few of what you think are the old established ones and then point out maybe some of the new stuff coming on so those of us sitting in here in agriculture have an idea which way we're moving?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Well, we're going to stick close to home for that first part of that question in North America. So, our long established partnerships, they include Mexico and Canada, obviously. I'll throw Brazil in that mix too, although we're doing some work there as well. But in 2024, exports of animal food, which includes pet feed, pet food, and any ingredients that go into those foods, totaled about 11.6 billion. Imports remained relatively low at half that, at 5.5 billion. So again, we're exporting a lot more than we import, and the majority of that is really going to our top two export markets are Canada and Mexico. So no surprise there. The North American Free Trade Agreement and later the USMCA really made those markets incredibly important for us. They're also, when you look at that, they're number one and number four, respectively. So Canada's number one and Mexico's number four for imports of animal food products. So there's a lot of two-way trade that's going on between the U.S. and Mexico, and then, of course, the U.S. and Canada. So that really illustrates that strong partnership the animal food industry has with these countries. A lot of times, it's almost seamless. Production flows are going back and forth quite a bit. Our relationship with Canada and Mexico, I don't think that's unique in the food and ag space. Obviously, I think most ag sectors will name those two as the top three. But it's why it's imperative as we look at going in and renegotiating the USMCA that the U.S. government recognizes and prioritizes food and agriculture and doesn't exclusively focus on other sectors, such as the auto industry, which we've been hearing a lot about from a USMCA perspective. So when I think about uncertainty in international trade and the flow back and forth, I want Mexico and Canada to be locked in pretty tight with us, right? I mean, we need that predictability, and we have moved into a North American economy more so than a Canadian, U.S., and Mexican economy.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I presume with the new business, if people are buying Brazilian product now that weren't before, then there's somebody that was buying that product that's looking for our new source, right? I mean, it's like capitalism, right? One business moves around.
Absolutely. I mean, it's no surprise when we got shut out of the Chinese market, the Brazilians were right there to step in and fill, right? I mean, so yeah, I call it fungible when I was in grad school in economics. That's a lot of these products are really fungible, but that's where the animal food industry has an opportunity to really lock in markets and buyers and suppliers because of the quality, because we do have a little higher differentiation on feed ingredients. You get what you pay for in some instances.
Absolutely.
That's the case we're making with one of our more established trading partners, Brazil, and one of our newer trading partners now, Vietnam. Because in Brazil, we've been connecting U.S. businesses with buyers in Brazil over the last couple of years. We've held 2 trade missions where we've taken U.S. companies down to Brazil, and we brought some Brazilian buyers to the United States to meet with our domestic members. And that, in Brazil, there's a lot of opportunities that exist. We just have to work on addressing some of Brazil's confusing import regulations for both pet food and livestock feed. So that's one we're working through. Of course, it's not the smoothest trading relationship right now with Brazil. So that's been putting a little bit of a wrinkle in it, but it's something that we definitely are still focused on because we think there's so much opportunity for some of our higher value differentiated feed ingredients down there. But Vietnam's a really interesting point or interesting country. Yeah.
That's good to know. Is there a possibility of us ever getting to a more standardized way of trading where, we can do all this good work and get this established and then just go a couple of years without having a crisis? Or
Well, in my dream world,
Yeah.
yes, Bob, we are. That's certainly what we're working towards. Even within the International Feed Industry Federation, one of our primary pieces of work we do there is we work to try to harmonize regulations, and of course, different approaches to regulations is one of the biggest barriers to doing that. But I'll give you Vietnam as an example country. It's about our efforts in Vietnam are really about association capacity building because they don't have those strong associations for manufacturers of pet and animal feed. And that limits their ability to be able to get information out about how do you make improvements, how do you use better quality ingredients. And then we also do a lot of feed additive and pet food education. But one of the things we're really doing is working on their capacity building to do science based regulations. So we're working with the regulators there in Vietnam to help them look at how do you regulate a product using good science, a risk-based approach that allows them to be able to be more compatible with our regulatory approach to things, therefore making it easier to trade. So that's one of the big areas of focus that we have with Vietnam, where it's also one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And they like the United States. I mean, I think there's a 96 or 97% approval rating of Americans among the Vietnam people. So it's surprisingly, very, very high. And so they want to do business with us. And as they grow their livestock sector, we're trying to do some education that shows how feeding additives have a much bigger role to play in their rations, particularly as they deal with bans on antibiotic use for prevention and control. You need optimal gut health if you're going to do that kind of thing. So as for pet food, oh my gosh, pets are on the rise in Vietnam, and they don't want to feed them table scraps anymore. They want that high quality pet food. So we're doing a lot of work with them to explore how U.S. pet food ingredients can be integrated into some of their local manufacturing and what good animal nutrition means. So I was there a couple of years ago, and the Minister of Agriculture at Vietnam looked at me and he said, we love American products, but you're too expensive. And I said, but you get what you pay for, and it's worth it because the quality is so high. And he grinned and he acknowledged it. So what we're trying to show is that better ingredients give you better performance, better efficiency, better quality product, or healthier pets. So that's kind of our message there. We've just completed about 2 weeks ago a trade mission where we took our members over and they met with 25 Vietnamese companies from over 5 provinces and started making those connections to do business. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and you've sort of answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I was curious if we're over there, trying to understand what those countries are looking for. I mean, many of these countries have not had open access to protein, for example. They don't. Many of them wouldn't know whether to pick a ribeye steak or whatever. So I guess are we working to also understand, what those markets are wanting and ways to provide those things to them?
Yes. Well, yeah, every time we go into a market, we do a thorough market assessment so that we have an idea of what are the trends within that market, what are consumers looking for, what are some of the primary challenges for domestic production and for importing. So we do that kind of assessment, and then we will revisit those trends and redo that assessment periodically to make sure we're still on track. And a great example of that is Morocco. We had a plan to go in and start doing trade missions. And what we did is in our market assessment, we found out that the biggest problem is that they have regulations that aren't science-based is a major barrier to entry. So instead of focusing on trying to connect buyers with suppliers and vice versa, it was to actually fix that regulatory barrier, that barrier to entry, before we before we proceed with trying to do business. So we definitely are looking at before we waste any, and I don't mean to say that in a pejorative way, but we don't want to waste our members' times. Before we do that, we make sure that they can still export to those markets. And I think that's one of the critical pieces. It's sexy, right, to put trade missions together, but if you can't get your product in, what's the point of making those business connections?
Yeah, that's all good questions. You mentioned, animal feed, pet food, and its sustainability being a bit unique. Is there something you can expand on how that is different for us than it is other countries?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I go over and I talk to the Europeans, they think that the United States doesn't care about sustainability and they've got the market on sustainability. And I've said to them, I said, our biggest problem is we're talking past each other constantly, right? We think that Europe is antiquated in its approaches and too draconian with its regulations. They think that we don't have any interest in sustainability, and nothing could be further from the truth. But that's the starkest difference I think I see globally in approaches to sustainability. So one of the things I always like to remind people is sustainability might be a new word, relatively speaking, in the United States, but we've been doing conservation. We have been working for efficiency gains. We have been looking at lots of ways to do more with less resources and minimize our impact on the environment at the same time. So it's in our blood. And I would argue that sustainability in the United States is a huge competitive advantage. I really do passionately believe that we do this better and more sustainably than most places in the world. And I'll give you an example. I love to say this because I just think it's so true. The feed industry and animal agriculture are the original upcyclers, right? We're the original recyclers of product. When you take a look at what we feed in animal rations, livestock feed, 37% of the ingredients used in domestic livestock diets come from other industries as byproducts that would normally go into a landfill or have no other use. And so it's retaining the value of that nutrient value, that density of nutrients, and putting it to a better and higher purpose. And so we're really excited about that. I mean, aquaculture, 82% of what is fed to aquaculture is a byproduct or co-product from another industry. Horses, surprisingly, 77%. But it goes down all the way to hogs, which is 26%, but we've got dairy at 50. The ruminants do a little bit better job recycling and eating things, but it's really pretty impressive when you think about that. And pet food's not an exception either. 50% of what goes into pet food is upcycled product from other industries. So how can you not talk about sustainability and talk about our impact from a resource utilization standpoint without bragging about that in the feed sector and the livestock sector? So I think that makes us a little bit unique. And I get asked all the time, Bob, about, well, why feed? Why should we be so worried about feed? Why aren't we focusing more on the animals? Well, a big chunk of environmental footprint from livestock, it comes from feed. Hogs and broilers, it's really high. It goes down a little bit for the ruminants. But certainly, we're a big part of what people perceive as the environmental footprint for livestock production. But I was, as part of the International Feed Industry Federation, I meet annually with the Food and Ag Organization in Rome. And one of the things that keeps coming up is how do we achieve more sustainable livestock systems globally? Well, we worked with them for the last 18 years. We've had a unique relationship. The global feed industry and FAO have had a unique relationship. And over that time, we've had a lot of conversations. We've demonstrated what the feed industry is doing. And they recently came out with a report. It was about the same time that we were hearing so much about, if you want to have a positive impact on the environment, quit eating meat. And I just scratch my head about that because it's talk about nutrient density, right? I mean, what we get from animal products. But what FAO came out and said, and this, sometimes FAO can be our harshest critic, said that the number one way to reduce, for instance, greenhouse gas emissions is to have increases in productivity. The second one was was improved animal health was the second most impactful way. And then it came down to feed nutrition and feed and nutrition improvements, rumen manipulation, circular bioeconomies, reducing food waste and loss. All of those were right up there. Dietary changes was one of the lowest impact on environment, was to reduce or to change your diet. So that to me says we have a role. Feed is a solution to some of our global challenges, and we are well positioned through ration innovation, working with our suppliers on feedstuff production, and then just that circularity, the byproducts, co-products, feeding products that would otherwise go into a landfill, that whole circularity conversation. We're well positioned to do something about that. So it's exciting, very exciting.
It is, and it's easy to look at 5 and 6 and 7 generation farm families and understand that sustainability is the whole story, whether it's the land or the animals or the money or the.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a challenge. You work for it. I mean, and constant changing in compliance regulations, and it's just there's challenges every day. So I think we're done a very good job of sustaining our industry.
I think we have too. And I think, there's always room to continue to improve. That's what innovation is for. That's what good management, farm management is for. There's lots of ways to continue to improve. But my argument is we've been making a lot of decisions in the name of economics and efficiency that if we just look at it slightly different and capture different metrics, we have one hell of a sustainability story to tell, right? There's just so much that we do well, and making sure that folks understand that their values that they want in their food products, we're already aligned with them from a value standpoint. We're already doing those things, and we're continuing to try to do better all the time. And so when sometimes farmers look at me and say, "Little lady, why are you talking to me about sustainability?" I'll say, "You should be talking to me about sustainability because you're the one who's doing it."
I think there's so many things we can look at. One that sticks out to a guy that's been around as long as I have is just the health of the pig, genetics. And we went from prophylactically using a great deal of medication, and through science and work, we figured out how to raise a healthier pig. And that's less cost. That's a safer food product. There's just nothing wrong with having healthier animals. And
Absolutely.
we made a lot of progress in that area.
Yes, we have. And that's what's so exciting, because as we try to move back on our usage of antibiotics, I always tell people feed rations and feed additives are not a substitute for antibiotics. When that animal's sick, you got to hit them with antibiotics. But it's like us. The healthier we are, the healthier our gut is, the more resistant we are to some of the illnesses that require antibiotics. And so absolutely reduce the mortality, increase the gain. We're in good shape.
And I have a similar story, except my version is we don't use that stuff because we're making so much money. We're just looking for ways to spend it. We use it because the animal's sick, and we'd prefer to just not have to buy it.
That's right. I always tell people one of my values I look for is animal welfare. I want animals to be healthy and well treated. And that's why I'm never going to be an antibiotic never user. I'm never going to support products that are never, ever antibiotics, because I just think it's important to make sure those animals are healthy.
I agree 100%. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I hope those watching are learning some things and enjoying it. I guess as we kind of near the end here, I'll ask you, are there things you'd like to mention that we haven't touched on?
Well, I think, we've got a lot of global conversations that are happening around the world about animal agriculture, about the way we do business and how we do it. And the one thing I would say is that it's important for us to be present. It's important for us to be at the table and talk about these things, because if we're not there, making the points that are important for us and telling our story, those conversations are being controlled and held by people who may not necessarily understand what we do or how we do business or how we produce quality animal food. And so the one thing I would say is, a lot of times it gets frustrating participating in some of those international dialogues, but it's vitally important that U.S. agriculture is present and shows up and helps lead those discussions to find real solutions and not just simply put roadblocks in place to prevent innovation and advancement. So that's the approach we're taking, and I think it's working for U.S. agriculture.
Well, I think we can complain a lot about U.S. agriculture, but we can't deny that it's a great business. It's a great industry. It's a fabulous way to make a living. It's rewarding, and we got a lot of struggles, but we're doing okay. We're still here.
That's right. That's right. I think we do it pretty dang well. Yes.
Yeah, better than most or than many. Let's put it that way. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Like I said, I've done it my whole life. I just think the American farmer will always be resilient. And, to those of you watching, listen to what you're hearing here. If you want to change things, we got to get up off the couch and go do something instead of just complain about it, right?
Yeah, well, change will come regardless. You'll just
Right.
like the change better if you're at the table.
Excellent point.
Bob, I would just add that if anybody wants more information, I really encourage you. We have a lot of our research is done by our Institute for Feed Education and Research. And if you go to ifeeder.org or afia.org, we have lots of great resources on our website. And I'd encourage folks, if you want to learn more about some of the things that are out there and some of the data that's surrounding what we're doing, it's all out there. And I've just welcome people to come and see what's happening in the animal food industry.
Yeah, and I'd second that by saying, we've whether it be FSMA compliance, just any topic, our companies use that as a resource for a long time. And there's good advice. You may not agree with everything you find there, but you will find some direction on what the intent of the compliances are and some help getting there. Definitely an organization, AFIA, that needs to be supported and utilized because there's good stuff there.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, then. Well, I hope those of you joining have learned some things. If you'd hit the like button, that'd be good. And if you'd share this with others in the industry, we'd appreciate it. And Constance, I want to say again, thank you for giving us some insight and hope to see you again sometime.
Bob, it's been a real pleasure. And thanks for letting me come and join you.